I remember back in the day when I'd barely digivolved past the baby stage and the worst part of my week was missing Dick and Dom into Bungalow on Saturday morning instead of the constant looming threat of rent increases, taxes, and my mental health being best described as this. In those faded days of youth, I used to engage in something which I'm fairly sure 200 years ago would have me burned at the stake for an affront against God, and that activity was brewing potions. The method was simple really. Go to the kitchen and bathroom cupboards, grab an assortment of goodies, and find a sink or bathtub to begin the experiment. Shampoo? Check. Tomato ketchup? In it goes. Toothpaste? Refreshing. Beans? Most definitely. And mouthwash for taste. Scoop up your latest creation and put it in the freezer for some reason, and wait for your mother to approach you the next day with a look of genuine confusion and disappointment. It would take years later to realise I was well on my way to becoming one of the best alchemists the land would have to offer. Philosopher's Stone? Step aside. This is a big mess in the bathtub that I'm not excited to clean up. And maybe it's because of my innate talent for all things alchemical that I find myself drawn to the Atelier series. In fact, just over a year ago, I made a video on Atelier Ryza, a title that I still hold in very high regard and actually ended up being one of my games of the year. The gameplay changes from other Atelier games wasn't something they necessarily needed to do to win me over, but it definitely made it feel somewhat different from its predecessors without invalidating them, and the amount of stuff you could accomplish in battle made me want to test my skills against the optional bosses. Turning alchemy into a talent tree sphere grid combination may not be everyone's cup of tea, but I slurped that shit down passionately and with no regard for decent table manners. The story was a 50-50 split for me. On the one hand, I thought the main cast were fairly likeable, and the entire human drama element surrounding the citizens of Rasenbolden, and being taught to distrust things which fell out of the norm, was honestly pretty compelling, especially since some of those things were alchemy and the teacher who was training Ryza. On the flip side, we had the main threat of the game, that being a race of creatures known as the Felucia. No matter how hard they tried to push them, I could never get fully invested in that part of the story. It felt less developed than the village politics, and I felt more genuine anger towards Boss. A bratty kid who had everything handed to him from birth and felt jealous that Ryza was developing a new skill and effectively leaving him as the only one with no real talent. He had a nice overall arc, and it felt good to see his character grow and improve on the attitude. Another issue came with cut corners due to budgetary reasons, things like textures, gathering models and enemies being reskinned to a somewhat comical degree, but it was also an understandable issue and nothing I'd ever fly off the handle over. Considering GUSTs need to pump out Atelier games at a consistent rate or their company will effectively end up like this, some things need to be sacrificed, and a lot of those don't negatively impact the gameplay or story. And considering that Atelier Ryza, at least by the date of this article, which was April 27th, 2020, sold 420,000 copies, weed, making it the best-selling Atelier game of all time, it's no shock that Ryza would get a second game, making this the first time a protagonist would have a sequel since the PlayStation 2. And since Ryza 2's release, the Ryza duology has now surpassed over 1 million copies sold. So it's safe to say there's a good chance our country-bred tomboy will be sitting in the very prestigious Trilogy Club. It's really exciting stuff, and watching a comfortable yearly routine being disrupted by unexpected success makes me really happy for the hard workers over at GUST. They've definitely earned this lucky break. So, wiping the brown off my nose for a second, what were my takeaways from Atelier Ryza 2? Well, the good news is I enjoyed it. A lot, actually. I was given a code for the PlayStation 5 version and bought it personally on the Switch, so I think that says a lot. But, as with all things, there were issues that held it back in similar ways to the first game, and I'm here to talk about them. On this, my show, so I can get the funds to buy more fucking cheese. Disclaimer, Clemps is not being controlled internally by a very hungry rat. Also, speaking of shows, some of you may be part of my streaming audience, and if that's you, then hello. I've had this requested for a long time, and since I've started streaming even more as of late, I felt it was a great time to open a stream archive channel. On there right now is a complete 60-hour Final Fantasy X playlist, and a 10-2 playlist is currently in the works as we speak. Whoa! Oh my god! I'll be slowly adding more as time inevitably ticks on, so I hope you look forward to it. If you want to be part of the action, then go follow me using the link found down below, and I hope to see you in chat real soon. It's like, right, now we've got a plane. Let's fucking strangle the Pope. And with that out of the way, let's get stuck in. The game starts off 3 years after Ryza decided to stay behind on the island to continue learning and teaching alchemy, her friends scattering to accomplish their own goals. However, after getting a letter from Tao asking for her assistance in researching some local ruins that might have possible ties to alchemy, and another request from Boss's dad who asked her to discover why a priceless family gemstone that's been in the house for generations has suddenly started glowing.
Don't touch this magical crystal.
She decides to tackle both of these at once as she heads off on a long journey to the royal capital of Ashra-Armbard. Upon arriving, the sheer size of a place appears to be too much for the country bumpkin until one familiar and not so familiar face come to her rescue. Yes, things are definitely a lot bigger in the city, one of those things being Tao, who can now ride on roller coasters and can finally apply for his twink license, and not much has changed for Boss outside of his humongous breast. Not long after reconnecting with her two friends, we're introduced to Patricia, or Patty for short, a noble's daughter who Tao has been tutoring. And luckily, thanks to Ryza's occupation as an alchemist, Patty's father gives her a whole-ass apartment in the middle of the city centre, and they have the audacity to say that they had trouble renting it out and just give it to Ryza under the condition that she does odd jobs for the city folk.
Try going to London and asking for that. They will pin you to the cross like Jesus of bloody Nazareth.
Also, since you'll be spending a lot of time in this room, you'll get very acquainted with the music, and I swear there's a flavour of something familiar here. I wonder if you'll hear what I mean. Eventually, with Patty accompanying them, they explore the ruins that brought Ryza to reconnect with Tao. They find the odd clue here or there, but the most interesting part of their investigation comes when the gemstone that Ryza's been holding on to begins to glow again. And upon returning home, we discover that the gemstone contains a little more than Ryza bargained for.
Hey!
She names the creature Fee, and he'll continue to live with Ryza as she adopts him into her life, serving as a companion to her and the party as they venture into many ruins and discover the mysteries that lie within them. But as I'm sure you can imagine, there are threats that get in your way, such as Larry the Lamb, Diancie Pokemon, and Little Blue Boys. But are the methods of taking down these non-threatening threats the same as the first game? What have they changed? Well, firstly, it still has the ATB-based gameplay that Ryza 1 had, and thankfully they've changed it just enough to make it even better, adding some quality of life where it was needed and giving us some new toys to play with as well. Some things remain mostly the same, an example of which are the action orders. Your party members will ask you to use a technique which can either be physical, magical, elemental, etc, etc. You do that and bada boom, destruction shall automatically rain on your enemies in the form of a unique character skill. If we look back at the first game, and this is from memory so I might be mistaken, all of the order skills were damaging techniques. However, in Ryza 2, everyone will get one technique that buffs the party. For Ryza, it's item damage, Lent is defense, so on and so forth. Problem is that you can't choose when your party buffs each other, as it's on a rotation. And I swear to God, they would never buff when I wanted them to, and would never attack when I wanted them to. Most of the time, Ryza would buff my items and the poor buggers would sit there, swole as fuck, wordlessly begging for anyone to appreciate their beefy gains. Another element that's remained are the Fatal Drives, a technique which sacrifices your tactics level and AP to turn your characters into Knights of the Round as they tactically nuke the opposing force. Something I always found a little funny when you take into account what some of these people do in universe. You sell pencils and groceries to local supermarkets, yet you're somehow able to embody the essence of God's loyal seraphim. So a friendly reminder to be polite to essential workers, or this might happen to you. Now, as for new additions, the first up is the ability to defend. Defending perfectly will give you extra AP, and you'll more than likely be using it during the earlier parts of a game or boss fights. Outside of those, battles would usually end before an enemy would make me feel at risk, so unfortunately this new feature was left largely unused. Next up is your AP and tactics level. In the first game, when you raised your tactics level, your AP would immediately shoot back down to 0, meaning you'd sometimes need to sacrifice precious AP you'd use for skills in order to raise the combos you could achieve and reach the point where you can unleash the aforementioned fatal drives. In Ryza 2, you have even less of a reason to worry. In fact, the devs went out of their way to stick each and every character with a syringe full of adrenaline because holy shit do you burn through fights fast in this game when the ball starts rolling. At least on normal mode. I'd suggest upping the difficulty if you want to experience all of the mechanics the game gives to you instead of burning through battles like you're late for a dinner date.
Give it a button, that up.
To start with, they've removed your AP lowering when it's dumped into your tactics level. Instead, it charges when you use skills, and your AP is left alone so you can pile it into your skills and the ability to use items before your ATB is loaded. And speaking of items, next up are the core items, which have seen quite the drastic change from the first game. In Ryza 1, everyone could equip 4 items onto a core crystal, which you could use in battle using your core charge points, or CC. If the item level is higher than your dexterity, however, you wouldn't be able to use it. In Ryza 2, anybody can use a high level item regardless if they have low dexterity or not. In order to use items, you'll need to individually level up your crystal, which determines the CC you start off with when a battle starts, and can also level up your crystal's elemental properties, which increases the effectiveness of certain items. It's quite the improvement, but I'll admit I do miss the days when you could alchemize an item and just use it without needing to charge points. During my playthrough, I'd rarely use items at all outside of healing and the occasional times I wanted to mix things up, which is a shame, because I didn't get to experience the other mechanic they introduced into the core crystal, which I've got to admit I kind of regret not utilizing more often. The core drive is essentially a limit break for whatever you keep inside your utility cupboards. You can select from a drop-down list of drives and pick whichever one works out best for the items in your character's core crystal. Use 3 of them in one turn and you can unleash some fantastic buffs and some crazy damage, which might be your saving grace if you're in a pinch. But we'd never be able to become so powerful if it wasn't for our old friend Mr. Alchemy. And whilst the base formula of Atelier Ryza 1 system is still here, the amount of extra stuff you can do is impressive, if a little overwhelming to get used to at first. All the basics stay the same from the first title. There's a sphere grid talent tree for the item you want to create. Get an item that shares the same element as the material loop, place it in, and once you've filled the loop, you'll get added effects, traits, and other added bonuses to said item once it's completed. You can still duplicate items, the ability to rebuild items that you created is still there, and you can reduce items you no longer need into gems so you can actually afford to rebuild in the first place. But what about these new additions? Well, to kick things off, we have Mist. Mist are items that are either dropped from enemies or can be extracted at the same time as gem reduction. You take the mist to the You take the mist to the oh my goodness. You take the mist to the You take the mist to the multiple Okay, you know what?
Multiply cauldron!
And turn them into essences. Once you have these essences, you have the option to either change a material loop to the essence's particular element, or you can use, let's say, a fire essence on a fire material loop, and can further increase the item's overall effectiveness. However, you can't use essences if you're attempting to rebuild an item. In fact, if you want to explore every nook and cranny in the game, you'll need to get used to this function, or you'll be thoroughly confused how to access it until you remember Google exists, where some very polite person on GameFAQs can tell you what to do. I did this, it was me. You can literally use my brain as a skimming stone. Another new inclusion is Evolution Link. Grab an item, grab another item, and merge them together to give the first item another bonus effect. Finally is your method of improving your overall alchemy. And at first glance, you'd think this would be like Clemps crack, but I have a couple of issues of Ryza's new skill tree. As you progress, you'll need to invest points you earn via alchemy or completing quests into your skill tree, unlocking things like harvesting higher quality items, new recipes exclusive to the skill tree, how many items you can add to an entire loop at a time, it goes on and on. Whilst this is really nice, I feel locking segments behind story progression or even optional content wasn't the best way they could have done this. There came a point where I was stockpiling so many skill points that I could afford 3 more story unlocks worth of skill tree options like it was nothing. And once you're done unlocking everything, there's nowhere else to burn these useless points. It would have been nice to have some sort of store where you can willingly throw your points away to get specific items or armor, or even being able to convert them into gems. I think it boils down to the option would have been nice here. So all of these additions combined means in Ryza 2, alchemy is quite the busy bee indeed, especially if you want endgame items that are actually somewhat effective against the secret boss. You've gotta add materials to the material loop, reduce items into gems so you can rebuild your items by moving back round the material loop, filling in the empty spaces, but you've gotta make sure you get mist and turn that mist into essences that match up with the loop you want to upgrade first, or you won't be able to maximize its potential when you rebuild it. Then depending on the item, you can use the evolution link to give it even more benefits for your personal taste.
Did you get all that? It's fine, it took me a minute.
Now, whilst this definitely isn't impossible to get your head around and actually turned out to be quite fun, I've got to admit, getting used to it and seeing all of the new tutorial boxes being dropped onto my desk like paperwork had me a little... Now, if we're following the law of equivalent exchange, something cannot be created without nothing. And yes, I did just watch Fullmetal Alchemist Brotherhood for the first time. I know I'm over a decade late at this point, but it was totally worth it. So it's up to you to go out and find those somethings to create things. And the only way to do that is to go beyond the borders of the city walls. In typical Atelier fashion, you'll make a variety of tools to go out into the field and gather the materials you need for your alchemy. Walk up to a gathering point, select which tool you want to use, and proceed to harm the local environment.
Nice.
As for the environments themselves, they range from okay to kind of gorgeous. A lot of work was put into some of these zones, and it really shows. My favourite being a lost city that gives off this ethereal feel with the different shades of blue, gemstones, and glittery particle effects that follow you throughout. Now, one negative I had in my previous Ryza video was not showing what materials you can get from each zone from the world map. And whilst they didn't fix this problem, and it's still kind of frustrating having to navigate menus to locate specific items, they did make things a little easier with the bubbles that appear above gathering points that tell you what you can get. This is an improvement, but considering how far back the world map thing was implemented into the series, I'd really like to see it return as yet another quality of life addition to the Ryza collection. But there's one more negative I brought up in my Ryza 1 video that is still here today. Some crimes I can forgive, but I can't forgive the PlayStation 1 fruit no matter how hard you press me. You spend the time making characters' clothes stick to their skin when it's raining, but you can't give me a delicious smooth apple. Heresy, says I, and I says a lot of things.
It smells so bad. Oh my god, it smells so bad.
So please, ladies and gentlemen, buy Atelier Ryza 2 so maybe, just maybe they can model some new assets, cause god bless them, they try really hard to get these games out on time. So this is the power of the PlayStation 5! Now there are a bunch of other inclusions that make your adventure a little more fun, especially since our main focus in this game is ruin exploration. You can swing, slide down steep cliffs, crawl under crevices where the camera wants us to know exactly what Ryza had for lunch.
Egg.
Ride a mount, which increases your movement speed and can help you dig for an assortment of materials. Squeeze through tight spaces to reach hidden parts of the map. Swim, and in some cases, dive underwater to discover even more materials and secret areas. And finally, and this is the most important one, speak to spooky ghosts in order for Ryza to collect the golden monkey from the maniacal grip of the Jungle King. Better watch out for Sid and Elvis as they pelt you with bananas. Sorry to all of my American audience for that one. Jungle Run, check it out. This is the biggest new gimmick of Ryza 2. Figuring out the mysteries of the ruins by finding fragments of the past using a compass of recollection, and piecing them together in your research list. The list giving you hints about which fragment to put where by reading and comparing the fragments you receive. You'll need to put some effort into these because you won't be progressing far into the story without them. Completing them fully gets you SP and unlocks pathways in your skill tree. I'll be real here and say this was my least favourite gimmick in the game, but I don't exactly disrespect it. Keep trying your best, I believe in you. You've got to play this game of hot and cold trying to find the clues in the first place, and it requires you make your way through the dungeon once and then go back to the other areas once the fragments are unlocked. And piecing them together isn't something I can see myself getting stoked for on a second playthrough. I won't deny there were some moments where I just clicked each fragment and waited for it to click in place because there's no penalty for guessing over and over again. I guess the best analogy I can give is this. Instead of feeling like Indiana Jones, I felt like Indiana Jones, the college professor, marking papers. At this point in the video, I'm going to start talking about characters and parts of the story I liked and disliked, and sadly, I can't do this without dipping in and out of spoiler territory. So I think it's safe to list all of this segment as spoilers and give you all a timecode if you want to experience everything story related for yourselves. 3, 2, 1, let's go. The story of Atelier Ryza 2 takes place in a couple of locations really, one being the capital and the other being the ruins. In the capital, you can engage with your friends through events and can complete personal quests to finish their personal storylines. Some of your friends are new, but some of them return from the first game, such as the aforementioned Tao and Boss. Others include people like Claudia, who bumps into the crew by pure chance and wants to join them on another adventure solely due to how much she's missed Ryza over the years. And look, I try my best to keep my personal ships to myself, but the game is making me want to see these two living together happily in a little countryside cottage together. I'm sorry, I don't write the rules. They know what they're doing!
Oh my god, they were roommates.
Up next is Lent, who left to become an adventurer at the conclusion of Ryza 1. In this game, you initially meet a much different man than the boy in the first game, practically dismissing the party when they notice he's in the city. Whilst this changes fairly quickly, he still has these moments scattered throughout his storyline. Lent was a character I'd hope they expand on a little more in the sequel due to his very rough childhood. And sure enough, they do tackle that here. Part of the reason why he's like this when you first meet him is because his own temper reminds him of his dad, and this really made me feel bad for the guy. However, it's later discovered that thanks to Leela, who's still traveling with Empel and aren't playable in this game sadly, that Lent is also like this because he's unhappy people aren't saying thank you as much after he sorts out monster problems. So on the one hand, I'm like, I really feel for you man, but on the other, much like Leela, I'm like, come on now. This kind of shit is gonna happen, and did you really get into that line of work just for the praise? I still like him though. His arc was wrapped up well enough, and I fully expect to see him cleaving mountains in two in the next game. Tao hasn't really changed much since his Ryza 1 days, but he's gained a lot more confidence and has even struck an unlikely friendship with his old bully from the island, Boss. I enjoyed the ongoing joke that characters never recognize Tao when they first see him due to his voice finally breaking and shooting up in height, and his dedication to becoming a scholar was fucking adorable. The one who shocked me the most was Boss, however, who I thoroughly disliked in the first game, and I'm sure that was their intention. Boss's entire character development has been a 2-game arc, and to see him grow this much as a person is kind of wholesome. He still comes off as rude / tsundere sometimes, but some of the talks he has with characters made me really respect him, and the fact he's dropping hints he'd like to join Ryza on her adventures someday makes me hopeful he'll be a candidate for a possible Ryza 3. Character growth, it really is possible, folks. The 4 new characters they added into the game start with Clifford, a light-hearted treasure hunter who's in it for the romance of adventure and helps Ryza fight back a monster when she first leaves the island, often putting the thrill of treasure hunting ahead of bills and taxes, and he lives in a box. He definitely has a few moments to shine in the story. Next is Seri, a member of the Auran race, making her the second playable Auran outside of Leela, who's looking to find a particular plant to help restore her world. She holds a grudge against alchemists due to their involvement in the destruction of her homeworld, but as the story chugs along, she learns that Ryza is nothing like the ones from her time, and comes to accept her as a friend. I just wish they did more with her character because she doesn't really have much to do. It doesn't help that all of the Auran we've met so far have been kind of similar in terms of their overall personalities and even line delivery, which kind of makes them feel perpetually stuck on a scale of 1 to Ray. They still do have moments where they can open up a little more, and those are good. I just wish we had more of them. As for Patty, who I briefly introduced at the start, she was a character I initially didn't enjoy because of her attitude. Having been brought up as a noble, she's given very strict guidelines to follow, and one of those guidelines was how close you can be seen with a member of the opposite sex, even being friends with them. Something that Ryza has no problem with because she was raised in the country where these kind of guidelines would have been laughed at. So Patty is quite stern towards Ryza and is convinced she's in love with Tao because of how close they are, feeling jealous of that because of her own personal feelings towards him. There was a point where I was worried the lubricant Ryza was making was to get the stick out of Patty's arse. This is why I'm so thankful her arc is the better one of the new characters. After hanging out with Ryza long enough, she begins to question her initial outlook, and with Ryza's help actually stands up to her own father who is trying to get Tao replaced, because he saw how close his daughter was getting to him, and the dishonor it would bring to his name if people saw a noble's daughter being too close to a mere commoner. I'm happy they pulled this whole storyline off, because I was worried this girls can't be friends with boys mentality would be pushed as a quirky part of her character, instead of something she needed to conquer and grow past. Finally, we move on to an unplayable character, but is still a main member of the cast and arguably the most important thing in the story. Fee, the small creature that hatched from the Brunnen's gemstone, is heavily involved in the mystery of the ruins and is also never seen away from Ryza's side. It's safe to say that he's the mascot of the game and also serves as Ryza's very intelligent pet. There isn't a single character in the game who dislikes Fee, and hell, even I don't dislike Fee. I don't dislike Fee's voice actress, who isn't at fault here and was only doing what she was directed to do. You can see where this is going.
We have grown past the need for ears.
Yes, whilst Fee himself is a perfectly harmless inclusion to the franchise, the high-pitched chirps that escape from his mouth during every single cutscene and every time you step outside of your atelier is particularly grating for me specifically. This is a me problem, not a Fee problem. Any game that introduces a character with a high-pitched voice immediately has me checking the sound options because it gives me that nails-down chalkboard feeling down my spine. I know that's a really weird, specific thing to dislike, but I can't help it. Other than the voice lines, Fee has a few funny, charming moments in the game, like how he rests on Boss's head because he feels close to him due to living under the same roof when he was inside the gemstone, or how he gets the zoomies whenever he absorbs mana from the ruins and promptly knocks over all of the pots and pans. Sadly, Fee's inclusion also serves to add drama into the story where there would otherwise be none, and that comes from him draining the mana from the ancient ruins. Because Fee's race originally came from Seri and Leela's homeworld, he can't stay here long without a steady source of mana, so he absorbs it from artifacts, which turns out to be a very bad thing when Empel and Leela come to find us right before the final dungeon. Incredible timing, really. You see, by absorbing the mana from these ruins, it means a portal will open up, allowing the Felucia to re-invade, and I swear they feel even more out of place here than in the first one. I didn't like them then, and I don't like them now. Go and please stay go. We end the problem before it really becomes one by beating the final boss, and Ryza lets Fee enter through the portal before it closes off so he can live a healthy life. This line here made my heart pull a frowny face, and seeing how heartbroken Ryza was to see him leave made me find my cat and give her a big cuddle, much to her annoyance. And after this, Ryza just decides to go back home to the island, which had me and every single character in the game go, well, this is a bit sudden. And it kind of leaves us at exactly the same point we were at in the ending of Ryza 1. Ryza's friends still have their goals to achieve, and Ryza returns back home with no friends to spend time with. I think what makes this feel even sadder is the fact that Ryza was so excited to bring Fee back with her so she'd have something to keep her company. And whilst the send-off was genuinely sweet and I really get the feeling this won't be the end of Ryza's adventure, having it end in such a similar way to the first one just left me feeling a little deflated. Not every story ends exactly the way I want it to, and there's part of me that respects Ryza for wanting to go back to where she feels more comfortable instead of living in an environment that feels a bit too hectic for her. But I think it would have made me feel a little better knowing she had someone to hang out with. Even Boss, for fuck's sake. I think the final message that I got from Atelier Ryza 2's story, more than the personal growth of our characters, and more than the brand new summer memories they've gained as fledgling adults, is that Ryza desperately needs to adopt a puppy. To conclude this video, I think Atelier Ryza 2 is a step up from the first game in many areas, and if you're a fan of the series and Ryza as a character, you'll more than likely have an incredibly fun time with it. The gameplay improvements make things a lot more fast-paced. Alchemy, whilst overwhelming me at first, soon turned into something quite relaxing as the new additions made more sense, and changes they made to exploration are without a doubt my favourite new elements. Solving the mystery of the ruins is definitely not for me, but I'm sure it fits into a few people's specific niches. The story is unfortunately in second place compared to Ryza 1's, at least personally. It definitely isn't bad, but outside of a few of the character arcs, I found myself wondering when it was really going to start. You do find out a lot of very interesting lore that are kept within the ruins, but outside of that, it really is a bunch of friends going on an adventure with their cute pet until two characters outside of the main party inform us we've been fucking up by pure accident. An aspect I adored from Ryza 1 was the town drama surrounding their suspicion and fear of new things, specifically alchemy, and Ryza's rivalry with Boss reaching an explosive point that had me pretty hooked. I think if Ryza 3 becomes a reality, I'd love to have something with a little more structure and things going on, and truth be told, I'd love to see Ryza's arc evolve past choosing to stay at home. For a character that loves adventure as much as she does, I'd love to see her spread her wings a little more and try even more things. Until then, I'll be playing this on the hardest difficulty on my Switch and keeping a very close eye on the progress of the series. Because if there's one thing the Atelier franchise is good at, it's putting me in a very good mood. And I think nowadays, we all need something that tries its hardest to put a very real smile on our faces. Thank you so much for your patience. I know you've been waiting a little while longer for content, but I sincerely hope this was worth the wait. Before I let the credits roll, I'd first like to give a massive thank you to my patrons. As always, you really help keep me afloat, and having confirmation that you're thirsty for more content is a great morale booster. Today I'd love to give special thanks to Be the Party Bee, Celia, Eggs Baker, and Demonic Lemon. Hope you'll all stick around for whatever I come up with next. I've got some fun ideas up my sleeve and really hope you enjoy them. See you all next time, folks. Also, 13 Sentinels Aegis Rim is one of the best games I played since Dragon Quest XI. Please go buy that as well and support Vanillaware's other projects. Thank you. Mwah.